Have you ever given thought, what is it that makes an athlete as good as they are? Have you ever watched an athlete train? You can pick anyone, you can pick any kind of sport. But have you ever watched or read, or are you familiar with what athletes do to be as good as they are, to be as successful as they are? Or does it just simply happen? You know, we sort of live in a culture today that we just sort of think things that happen, they just sort of happen, and it just happens. They just that good, or they're just that successful. But once you begin to look at it a little bit more, you realize that no, nothing really just happens. It's amazing if you begin to look and begin to give notice how much time and effort athletes put in to be the athlete that they are. John?
I think there's a lot to do with just natural ability, depending on what it is, whether it's academic or physical. There's got to be some sort of natural ability to even do it. And with a Christian, once they become a Christian, they're going to gain that natural ability.
Mm-hmm.
And from then on, it's kind of good. I think this is what you're getting at in your lesson.
Well, we'll see. We'll see. For us as Christians, since we know that this is sort of foreign to us, but what God has done has always come back to this, and I know I mentioned it quite a bit, but everything that we study, it always come back to it. He has given us his Spirit. So the things that he has given us to do, it is natural, it should become natural to us in that sense. Because once again, it's not coming from us on our own, but we're seeking to, in a sense, tap in to this natural part or his part that he has given to us. But still, it requires what we're going to be looking at tonight, and we're going to be looking at another passage in Corinthians, and it's the 9th chapter of 1 Corinthians, as the Apostle Paul was writing to this particular congregation, and there's a lot of things that he brings to their attention, and we want to look at this aspect of as well. And Paul, he took notice of the athletes of his time. I don't know if you could say that he was a sports enthusiast or not, but he took notice of runners. He took notice of boxers. He took notice of the games that was mentioned. And these games that is mentioned here that we're going to be reading about, it sort of goes back, there's a root of what we know as the Olympics, where people came together and they competed. But they came together with their best. Depends on what their sport was or what their event was. They usually sends the best to what we're familiar with today, the Olympics. But once again, have you ever given thought to the training of these people who want to be a part of the Olympics? Have you given thought to the competition that they have to meet before they ever qualify to get to the Olympics? And once you think about when it comes to athletes, there is a lot to it. And what the Apostle Paul is going to be doing, as we're going to be looking at this passage, is sort of pointing the Christians to an attitude that an athlete has. And we know that there are a lot of athletes. You have a lot of how can I put it, stages of an athlete. In other words, you have some bad athletes. They're not good at their event at all. You have some average athletes where they're okay. And then you have the elite athletes. And those are the ones who are known as the best or some of the best in their sports. But if you're going to have an athlete, they have to have a certain mentality. And if they don't want to, I'm going to zero in on the word train, they're going to be a bad athlete. They may wear the name, but they're not going to win very many events, if any, if they do not want to train or have the right attitude. So what the Apostle Paul was spurring the Christians on to here with the Corinthians, just ought to tilt your head a little bit. But he's seeking to remind these Christians of their attitude that when they run in this Christian race, they should be running to win. And people can have that different attitudes when it comes to events. Well, I just want to see if I can do it. Should that be a Christian's attitude? I just want to see if I can do it. Or I just want to be noted that I ran this race. I'm not out to win it. Doesn't matter if I win or lose. But I just want to make known I ran in this event or competed in this event. That shouldn't be an attitude of a Christian. In this Christian race, our attitude should be one and one only. I'm in to win it. And if I'm not in to win it, why am I even a part of the race? But if I'm going to win it, I have to have a certain attitude about me. A certain attitude. And he's the Apostle Paul here, he's going to point out this attitude. So let's go to 1 Corinthians chapter 9. 1 Corinthians 9. And notice what he says here. We're going to pick up there in verse 24. 1 Corinthians 9:24. And the Christian life is compared or is described or it is sort of given to us in different senses. A while back we were looking at it as a war or warfare. That's one of the ways in which it's brought to us. It is a fight. It is a struggle. But here he's going to be bringing it to us in an athletic event. So he starts out in verse 24. He says, "Do you not know that those who run in a race, they all run," and please notice that concept because he's going to be repeating it throughout this passage. They all run, but only one receive the prize. Now, if we were to compete in an event, and we're going to continue to look at this, but if we were to compete in an event, and we know that there is going to be only one winner, understand that that's not the way it is with the Christian race. But let's try to get the concept first. And we know that there's only going to be one winner. And I want to win that event. How hard would I run? How hard would I train for the event even before I run? How much effort would I put into it to get in shape, to be in shape? So this is what he is starting out with. How bad do we, or a Christian, want to win? That has to be foremost. Now, a lot of people take it for granted, I'm going to win. It's a given. That's not the case, as we're going to see down through here. Look what his exhortation is. He says, run in such a way that you may win. Now, that should be obvious, isn't it? If I'm running, I should be running to win. But as I've already mentioned, to some people, that's not the case. Now, this thought, and he's going to repeat this as well, run in such a way, that involves all the details that is involved to win, for a runner to win a race. And he doesn't go into it specifically. He just simply describes it in such a way. So we're going to have to try to look into these events and try to get an understanding. What does it take for a runner to win a race? Maybe we know one and we can sit down and talk with them. How much training you have to put into this? Or maybe we can read up on it as well. What does it take? He goes on in verse 25. He says, everyone, notice the word, who competes in the games, they exercise, here is one of the things that are needed. They exercise self-control. In other words, an athlete, they have to eat certain food. They have to put in certain amount or certain hours of training, depending on what the event is. They have to put in quite a bit of practice, depending on, once again, what the event is. So all of this, whatever they do, it comes down to this thing of self-control. And do you realize how many people don't have this needed, vital ingredient of being able to control themselves? Actually, themselves control them. For example, our cells tell us, I don't feel like putting the X. And how do we respond? Okay, I won't do it. My body is telling me, or my mind is telling me, or whatever it happens to be is telling me, I'm not up to it. I don't feel like it, so I'm just not going to do it. Our self controls us, but not in this good sense. In other words, we don't tell ourselves what to do. We're basically dictated what to do in a negative sense. We have to cultivate this virtue of self-control. Go ahead.
You said it there. I don't feel.
Yeah.
It's all about, and that's in our culture today. It's all about
feelings.
It's not about just determining this is what I'm going to do. It's about how it feels.
We know what we're supposed to do. We know when we're supposed to do it. But that little voice began to speak in our minds. And a lot of times it convinces us. Either I don't feel like doing it or I don't want to do it. And we follow along. That's not the mentality of an athlete. Because I'm pretty sure they don't want to get out there and train. They don't want to go out there and sweat. They don't want to go out and do things where their muscles are just simply sore. But they do it. Because why? They want to win. Go ahead.
It's been a while back, but this did cross my mind. I was watching some things on some athletes, and one of them, they put in between 5 to 7 hours a day, intense training.
Yep.
And these are professional athletes.
Yep.
And Tyson, he got up at 4 o'clock in the morning, every morning, to train. And he said, if my opponent starts getting up at 4 o'clock in the morning to train, I'm getting up at 2.
Yep.
And if he gets up at 2, I'm getting up at 12.
He had the mentality. That's exactly what we're looking at and what Paul is seeking to bring out. All because we want to win. Now, with us, and it's going to describe this, because with Christians, we're seeking to accomplish something greater than winning a sporting event, as Paul goes on and mentions. So he goes on and he says right after this thing of mentioning self-control, he says, they then do it to receive a perishable wreath, but we an imperishable. So our race, as he describes it here as running, and he's going to use a couple other analogies as well, but our race is far more important. It is far more rewarding, because what we're striving to win is eternity with God. And that should put the intensity of winning within us all the more. It's not just simply a wreath. And I'm not sure if there was a golden wreath or a bronze wreath or just simply a plant, a piece of a plant during this particular time. But as I was going through this and looking at this, the Boston Marathon came to mind. All of us are familiar with that race, right? It is a race of approximately 26 miles. I don't even think I would make it past 5. Probably not 2. But 26 miles. And I'm not sure how many people run that race every year. But I'm pretty sure they have to go through qualifying and all those different things as well. And then there's probably people I'm just going to run it because I want to say I was in the Boston Marathon. But nevertheless, I was looking at what their reward was. What do they get for winning or coming into these various places in the Boston Marathon? And their prize is $150,000 for the first prize winner. And then it just sort of goes down from that to about 20, goes all the way down to $1,500, depending on how you come in. But once again, that is temporal, earthly reward. Perishable. Our race consists of what is imperishable. Based on that, in verse 26, he says, therefore, Paul is talking about himself now. He says, I run in such a way as not without aim. In other words, he has a purpose. And he keeps that purpose before him. See, an athlete understands whatever his training routine is, it has a specific benefit for the body. If it's running, why do people run? Build their endurance. Build endurance. Why do people lift weight? Build their strength. Yeah. See, each thing that they're training or putting the time in training for, it brings a certain benefit. So we as Christians, we also have to recognize the various things that we do, it brings a certain benefit. Why do we pray? What benefit is it to us? How does it benefit us spiritually? Why do we assemble? How is that benefiting us? Because if we don't recognize the benefits that it brings, then we're going to not value in a sense, as we're looking at this analogy, the exercise or the training that we're doing. So he says, in his run or in his race, he is not without aim. He's aiming at something, and he is seeking to accomplish something specifically. He goes on, he says, I boxed, using himself as an illustration, but now he's switching over to this event of boxing. He says, I box in such a way as not beating the air. Now, I don't know, have you ever noticed someone shadow boxing? That's what they call it. Shadow boxing? I mean, they're throwing punches, but they're not hitting anything. I guess it's a sense of training, but it's really not accomplishing anything except for the training aspect. Paul said, I don't do this, using this analogy. But here's what he does. Verse 27. He says, but I discipline my body. And if you look at that word discipline, it carries the meaning that I bruise. I bruise. I don't think the Apostle Paul was into the asceticism type situation, but he did have his body under control. He says, I discipline my body and I make it my slave. Notice it's not the other way around. Well, we are our body's slave. And our body dictates to us. That's not how it should work. And it didn't work with the Apostle Paul. He said he made his body a slave. And you know what was before Paul constantly? He says, so that after I preach to others, I myself will not be disqualified. See, the Apostle Paul understood something as he's using this example or analogy of athletes. Winning is not automatic. We have to get that concept. Winning, our race, spiritual race, is not automatic. I understand what Jesus has done for us. I understand the forgiveness that Jesus grants us. I understand the mercy and the grace that the Lord grants us as well. But still, it is not automatic. How many people do you know of who have started the race, probably have ran the race for a while, and they have fallen? How many Christians do you know who are in a state of straying little by little? they're jeopardizing of being disqualified. Because they don't have this athletic mentality that is needed in order to win this race. Now, he goes on, and he reminds the people of something, and I want to remind us, we know it. But as the Apostle Paul reminded them, let's be reminded as well. We keep reading, coming to the 10th chapter. He says, and he's still speaking to this same group, to the Corinthians. He says, "For I do not want you to be unaware, brethren, that our fathers," he's going to take them back now to a very real example. And notice that little word all as we read down through here. He says, "For I do not want you to be unaware, brethren, that our fathers were all under the cloud. They were all, or passed through the sea." That great deliverance, right? "And all were baptized into Moses in the cloud and in the sea. And all ate the same spiritual food that was the manna. And all drank the same spiritual drink that was the water coming out of the rocks that the Lord provided. For they were drinking from a spiritual rock which followed them, and that rock was Christ." Look at what he's reminding them of. Look at verse 5. "Nevertheless, with most of them, God was not well pleased. For they were laid low in the wilderness." So in other words, Paul is given a reason why he is emphasizing this mentality of being an athlete. Because as he looked at their ancestors, and it is an amazing thought once you begin to think of it. How many people left Egypt? Number is approximate. Go ahead. Yeah. They had an army of 600 and some thousand. That's a great host in itself. But then you begin to try to calculate the women and the children and so forth. Scholars figure about over or 2 million plus. All of them died in the wilderness. In other words, they didn't win. But all of them had this great experience that Paul here is bringing forth. Crossing the Red Sea, being baptized into Moses, the cloud and the sea. All of them experienced that. All of them witnessed or experienced the great miracle and power of their God. All of them did that. But they didn't win. What does this thought, what should it do to us? And what challenge does it present to us? Great host of people. God's possession. God called them out as God called us out of the world. He provides so many things for us. But in the end, they lost. And they did not win. Don't take God's salvation for granted. So many people do. And they end up losing. Now, he goes on, and he's going to take us a little bit on this journey. And once again, we're familiar with it, but I want to take time to look at this a little bit more. And sort of keep before us as we look at these things, how did the people of God ever get themselves involved in the things that they did? What was lacking? And if you study this group of people carefully, there was an attitude or a viewpoint. It just seems like what they're involved in didn't matter except for when they did not have what they wanted. But as far as the things of God, they weren't very much concerned at all. In other words, they did not have this mentality of giving thought constantly. What does it take for me to win? For their winning it was to get into the promised land. That is where the Lord was taking them. What does it take for me to win and to experience God's great blessing of the promised land for them? Apparently, that wasn't in their thinking as it should have been. That didn't keep them on their guard as it should have been. That then caused them to sort of look at what they were being tempted to do and see how that would affect the overall accomplishment of their goal of the promised land. Because we begin to look at these things, and by the way, we see these things in our day as well with Christian people, not in the same way, but we see the straying, we see the involvement, very same thing of these people. And it's all because, apparently, they're not running to win. Otherwise, these things would be sought to be avoided at all costs. At all costs. So let's look at it. So he goes on. Notice verse 6. And he makes this statement. Now, these things happen as examples for us. As he was writing to the Corinthian Christians. So the things that we're going to be looking at, it is not just simply events of history, even though they are and they're recorded. But they're recorded for our benefits to help us to see that even though God brought deliverance to these people as he had brought deliverance to us, it is our example. Even though God worked within his people's lives miraculously in the wilderness, and he works within our lives miraculously as well, the example is, if you think you are standing, be careful that you don't fall. This is how this is going to be summarized and coming to an end. If you think you're standing, be careful that you don't fall. Don't just give way. Let's look at the first one that he's mentioned. He mentioned certain things here. The first one is this. And let's go back to the wilderness travels. The people craved evil things. They craved evil things. Let me sort of summarize it. Because what was constantly before their minds, it seems like from what they were saying, we're going to be looking at some of their words. They were constantly looking back to Egypt. Egypt was where God had delivered them from. But their minds and their hearts and their remembrance was still there. So here's one of the things that we have to train ourselves in, that we need to cut off our past, whatever it may be. Now, we can remember what we were and where God has delivered us. God wants us to remember that. But all of those things that we liked and all those things that we involved in and all those things that we tell ourselves we had a good time in doing and all the things in which we enjoyed, get rid of all that stuff. That's junk. And it's going to be a dead weight. A dead weight. And it's going to be a constant pull to seek to pull a person back. It's amazing. Christians can talk about their past life and the things that they did and the things that they enjoyed. And those type of Christians, I don't hear them talking very much about God and what God has done or is doing for them. Their focus is their past. That's not a winning mentality. It's a losing mentality. So we find these people, let's look at the example, let's look at the event. Let's go back to Numbers chapter 11. Numbers chapter 11, And we're picking up these events after they crossed the Red Sea. And now they traveled to Mount Sinai, spent about a year there, and then they were going to travel on. But we're going to be looking at the traveling aspect of their journey. So Numbers 11, let's pick up there in verse 1. It says, now the people became like those who complain of adversity. Now look at that. Because a lot is going to be told about a person or a people in the midst of their difficult times. That is when you're going to come to know or see the real person. When times are hard, when things are difficult, when we don't have our needs or necessity. How will I conduct myself then? It's easy to trust and speak and praise God when things are going good. But what about when adversity comes? So these people became like those who complain of adversity in the hearing of the Lord, and when the Lord heard it, his anger was kindled. Now we need to ask ourselves the question, why? Why did the Lord get angry? The Lord, through all of the events really, but we know that the scriptures speak so often about God's people crossing the Red Sea, right? That was no small event. It wasn't a small event. And if we can't imagine ourselves, okay, I'm on this side of the river. First of all, I'm seeing that what God did to the water in giving this path. Now this water is just sort of huddled up on both sides. And now the Lord is calling me that I am to walk through that water or the path. And really, I think the Lord did it on purpose. I didn't have a choice. I got Israel's army on this side, right? And they're pursuing me. They're in hot pursuit, and they want to take me back to Egyptian bondage. But then I have this miraculous event of my God with the Red Sea, and he's telling me to go forth. So I take the step of faith, and it needed faith. Or otherwise, I would have balked. I'm not walking through there. So I take the step of faith, as God's deliverance requires. Whether it's for us as Christians, that step of faith has to be taken. So I take it, and I'm walking through. I'm pretty sure I'm watching the water. I am amazed at all what's going on. I don't know if I can see fishes or whales or what in that water, but nevertheless, there it is, amazing. And I make it on the other side. And it should have been imprinted on my mind, wait a minute, my God did that. My God just gave me an amazing deliverance. Now, I'm in the wilderness. And I have needs. Food, water. And now I'm going to complain? To the very same God that gave me this great deliverance, I'm going to complain? So just in that small view, I can see why the Lord got angry. We keep reading. And it says, and the fire of the Lord burned among them and consumed some of the outskirts of the camp. In other words, the Lord showed forth his anger. The people therefore cried out to Moses, and Moses prayed to the Lord, and the fire died out. Okay, event was prayed for, the event taken care of. The account goes on, verse 3. So the name of that place was called Taberah. That just simply means burning in the Hebrew language, Taberah. because the fire of the Lord burned among them. Now, we have another event. And notice that these events just sort of happen as they go along. And as we notice these events, it seems like they didn't learn anything from the previous event. So in verse 4, the rabble who were among them. What is rabble? Well, what type of people are rabble? Be careful about the rabbles, because they will influence you, and they are contagious. The rabble who were among them had greedy desires. And also the sons of Israel wept, notice the word again, and said, who will give us meat to eat? We remember, going back to Egypt now, we remember the fish which we used to eat free in Egypt. I guess they forgot. No, it costed them lives. They were slaves. Free to eat in Egypt, the cucumbers and the melons and the leeks and the onions and the garlic. But now our appetite is gone. There is nothing at all to look at except this manna. What was the manna? I'm not talking about what it was, the type of food. But notice what they're doing. They're complaining about God's provision. And I look at this and say, well, do you guys understand what you're doing? See, once people get into this attitude of complaining, it seems like they just simply become blind. The manna was what God gave them in order to sustain them, their very life in the wilderness. And now they're complaining about it. Now, remember, this is examples for us. Have we ever complained about God's provision? Think about it. The tendency is there. Think about it. And it should cure our tendency to complain. Because everything that we have comes from our Lord. Whatever situation that we happen to be in life, the Lord has brought us here. I truly believe He has a purpose. He has a purpose. And I'm going to complain? See, I study this over and over and over and over again, and it cures my complaining. Because I realize what I do when I complain. And it makes my God angry. Because it's showing a lack of appreciation. It's showing a lack of insight to what my God is seeking to do. I don't understand Him. It's showing a lack of faith and trust. I'm forgetting all about, wait a minute, my God cares about me. So whatever He allows to come to me, there has to be some good in it for me. It doesn't matter how hard or how difficult it may be. These are examples for us. He goes another example. They became idolaters. Do you think that you could ever become an idolater? Be careful how you answer. Go ahead.
I'm just thinking of that last thing. You've been talking about thankfulness in this season of, Thanksgiving, and I think it's just like the parents are the same way.
Yeah.
When we see children who aren't thankful, for what they have and what they get, or disregard the things
Yep.
and you just go, so you're in trouble. Go to
Yeah.
your room.
Well, I know it's all a strong language, but I hate this time of year. Especially the Christmas time of year. Because the focus is all wrong. I hear commercial after commercial after commercial after commercial, radio commercials about buying this, buying that, buying this, gift. And it just causes me to think, wait a minute. That shouldn't be what it's all about. Nothing wrong with gifts and all of that, but all of that main focus, people have forgotten about the gift that God gave. And they value the things so much more than what God gave. So it's all one of those times of the year. There's some good in it, yes. But if you're not careful, if we're not careful, we can get caught up in all of this buying, without giving thought to the important aspect. But that's another thought. They became idolaters. And once again, I give thought to how can God's people ever become an idolater? Now, I can sort of see it in this case because in their thinking, they were going along with the physical aspect of things. In other words, we as mankind, and something that we have to work with and we have to deal with it, we really, or let me put it this way, it's difficult for us to comprehend something or someone we cannot see. So what they did in becoming an idolater here in this particular instance is that they tried to give their God, their Lord, a form, a physical form, when they made that calf. Let me show you just one instance. If you go back to Exodus 32. Exodus 32. And as I go over it again, I'm amazed at the part that Aaron played in this. Because he was the one who had the skill to form this thing. So I want to just pick up there in verses 4 and 5, Exodus 32, verses 4 and 5. It says, this is Aaron. Aaron took this, meaning all the gold and earrings and all the things that the people were going to give for this. So Aaron took this from their hand and fashioned it with a graving tool and made it into a molten calf. And they said, notice their way of thinking and seeing this is your God. So they were trying to transform the Lord God, the living God, to this image, one and the same. So it goes on, and remember, Moses was up on the mountain at this time receiving the laws which outlawed this. It goes on and says, O Israel, who brought you up from the land of Egypt. There was no calf at the crossing of the Red Sea. There was no calf there. But apparently they needed something physical to make their God real. And verse 5. Now, when Aaron saw this, he built an altar before it. So Aaron built the calf. Aaron also built the altar in order to worship this calf. Sacrifice to it. And Aaron made a proclamation and said, tomorrow shall be a feast to the Lord. See, they were trying to place the Lord as this image. But even despite their so-called good intentions, the Lord saw it as idolatry. Because there isn't anything that can properly display God in any form. In any form. And with the bull, it was all about fertility. That's why they worshiped that thing. Idolaters. Do we need the physical before we believe in our God? And we know that the scripture tells us We are to walk by faith and not by sight. It admonishes us. Faith and not sight. We need sight, then we also would have the tendency to become idolaters. Idolaters. I'm going to have to rush through the rest of these. But we can talk about the people's immorality. How could they fall into immorality? But we see Christians falling into immorality today. So see, it's really no different. But in order to avoid all of these, we have to have this mentality of an athlete. I'm going to win. I want to win. And these are the things that are going to trip me up or cause me to lose. And we know the situation here, and it's all interesting to see how it all evolved. But in Numbers chapter 25, verses 1 through 3, it says, while Israel remained at Shittim, the people began to play the harlot with the daughters of Moab, and they invited the people to the sacrifices of their gods, and the people ate and, you start associating with people of the wrong kind. And the tendencies are going to be even greater for you to do as they do. What's the harm in going and eating a meal with these Moabites? I can just sort of hear the thinking that people, how they reason. What's the big deal of going to their sacrifices? You can just sort of hear them. And apparently they got to the point. It's no big deal for us to bow down and worship this thing. They did. And once again, Baal. There's attraction to Baal. It's the immorality. The immorality. And there were even leaders who got involved in this. Anybody can become immoral if they don't practice this thing of discipline and self-control. They tried the Lord. You look at this event, this is an interesting event as well. They are speaking once again against the Lord's provision. You look at verse 5. They were in the midst of their traveling, and by the way, now they're getting closer to the promised land. They're sort of come up into Edom now, out of the wilderness. So they're getting closer and closer, inching closer. Verse 5, the people spoke against God and Moses. Why have you brought us up out of Egypt to die in the wilderness? For there is no food and no water, and we loathe this miserable food. God's people talking like this, speaking against the Lord's provisions. The last one that he gives is that they grumbled. And this is an interesting situation because there was a problem with rebellion within the camp. This is dealing with Dathan and Abiram, as well as 250 other leaders of the people. So this was high ranking. But they were rebelling against Moses and Aaron. They actually were seeking to take their position, more so the priesthood of Aaron. God dealt with it. And the way that God dealt with it, as you see there depicted, this group, he just swallowed them up. The earth opened up and swallowed them. That was God dealing with them. But look at the people. Look at what they saw. 16th chapter of Numbers. But on the next day, in other words, after this opening of the earth and this group of people been swallowed, Dathan and Abiram and the 250, the fire came down from heaven and took care of them. So on the next day, it says, all the congregation of the sons of Israel grumbled against Moses and Aaron, saying, you are the ones who has caused the death of God's people. It just seems like they didn't get it time and time In time. So Paul, let's come back to what Paul says now as we close this out. We come back to 1 Corinthians 10. And Paul emphasizes once again, now these things happen to them as an example. And they were written for our instruction, upon whom the ends of the ages have come. In other words, not one of us are not susceptible. We are all susceptible to these things. They can happen. What keep these things from happening to us, or what will keep these things from happening to us, is our mentality. I want to win. So I'm going to avoid, with the power of God, with the help of God, with the aid of God, I'm going to avoid all of these things. I know how my God feel about it. We have the examples. I see there was God's people who got themselves involved in these things. And we know all the things that was there or wasn't there. But if I want to win, I have to have the mentality. I'm going to stay as far away from these things as possible. Because here's how he closes it. Verse 12. Therefore, let him who thinks he stands. I think we all do. I think we're all here tonight given the thought that we're faithful. I think it's true. But he goes on and he says, take heed. You're standing now. You're faithful now. Do everything that is possible to bring that to the end of the race. But take heed. Take heed that we do not fall. Because it is possible. I've watched too many Christian brethren and sisters fall. I've watched too many brothers and sisters stray. And it just seems like they have lost or don't give thought to what they're doing. Let it not happen to us. An athlete, studying, give thought in what they do, and let us have the same mentality as well. So we'll close it out there. So as far as announcements, once again, we still don't have many, but we're coming into the month of December.